With us is Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter, entertainer Peter Rowan. With over 6 decades of a musical career, it's made him one of our great legends, not only in bluegrass, but acoustic music around the world. Peter, I'd kind of like to talk about a couple highlights in your career, if we could start there.
Sure, yeah.
I guess I'm going to take everybody back to a time of 1973 when you were in San Francisco and you was with Vasser Clements and John Kahn, Jerry Garcia, yourself on guitar, and of course we had Dave Grisman on mandolin, and that was the great album, Old and in the Way. I guess the thought about that is, was that album pre-planned? Was the gig pre-planned? What was it like working with those legends at that point in time?
Well, it started when I left the East Coast, and I had been in a band for about 2.5, 3 years called C Train. And we had been produced by George Martin, who did the Beatles, and we were on Capitol Records, and there was a lot of moving parts to an enterprise that big with the Albert Grossman management involved and publishing and the complications. And I was looking for something a little simpler. And plus my brothers were out on the West Coast, my brothers, Chris and Lauren, and Dave Grisman was producing them for Columbia Records. I was just itching to come on out. I had spent the winter, in my final 6 months with C Train. We were doing the sweat lodges in the living room of a rented house and just dreaming of going west. And when I got to San Antonio with C Train, I gave my notice and met them a week later for my last gig. But I wrote Midnight Moonlight on that on those first days of having left the band down in San Antonio. And I knew I was onto something else, but through the summer, we tried various versions of doing that tune, and bluegrass was really hard to get dates with.
Down in San Antonio, beg, steal or borrow 2 nickels or a dime, call me on the phone. I'll meet you at Alamo Mission, we can say our prayers. The Holy Ghost and the Virgin Mother will heal us as we kneel there in the moonlight. For the deeds you have done, no hope for tomorrow in the setting of the sun, and the ocean is howling with things that might have been, and that last good morning sunrise will be the brightest you've ever seen. In the moonlight, in the midnight, in the moonlight, midnight moonlight, in the moonlight, in the midnight, in the moonlight, midnight moonlight.
That was recorded live at the boarding house in San Francisco, California, October of 1973. Midnight Moonlight. Playing on that track was the legendary fiddle player Vasser Clements, Jerry Garcia on banjo from the Grateful Dead, Dave Grisman on mandolin, John Kahn on the bass, and of course the great Peter Rowan. The great Peter Rowan is with us. Now back to Peter, here on the Big Al and Sandy Radio Show.
I mean, I think the Lilly Brothers were still at the Hillbilly Ranch in Boston, and Bill Keith and Jim Rooney were still playing around Cambridge. But the energy to make a living full time at Bluegrass, it was hard, you know? Mm-hmm. And so I just decided to head west, and I wrote The Land of the Navajo on the way west. And when I got out to the west, and Dave Grisman was there with my brothers, we went to a little town, Stinson Beach, and I would just come over and see David every morning. We'd make the coffee and go out and pick, walking around barefoot in the sand dunes. And it wasn't very long before David, full of bright ideas, he goes, Garcia lives just up the hill. He likes to pick. He didn't say it was nothing like, if we get Jerry, we'll get an audience. It was he likes to pick. And so what happened was, for about 3 months, we would just go up to Jerry's house and pick. And he brought John Kahn in, who was his electric bass player in a kind of an R&B band he had with Merle Saunders, the organ player, the Jerry Garcia band. But Jerry pulled the banjo out, and he met us. We came up there to his driveway up on the side of the mountain, and he met us in the yard with that banjo, just going wild, singing "Pig in the Pen," and so we found our love for the music enabled us to practice a lot and play a lot. And Dave Grisman had all these songbooks. He had the Bill Clifton songbooks. He had the Red Allen songbooks, and we had heard all these tunes and admired them forever. And so we had the songbooks, and we could practice by reading the lyrics on the songs, mm-hmm. And it was like a study, it was like an immersion. It was so good to get back into playing bluegrass. And Jerry's energy was super. He was all about, let's do that. Let's include that. So I started to bring in songs that I liked. And this new song I had written, Midnight Moonlight, I had put some chords in there. I knew that David Grisman would like playing them. Because these guys, Richard Green, Dave Grisman, they're really advanced. And they like, we love the bluegrass, and there's nothing like the straight ahead thing. But, we were of our generation. So I brought in the Hobo Song by a guy named Jack Bonus.
Just a little hobo
Midnight Moonlight with its passing chords and solo section. And, you know, we'd always look over at Jerry like, is this cool? And Jerry would just nod his head. Yeah, this is cool. And John Kahn, wonderful bass player, playing acoustic bass. And we played, before Vasser joined the band, we had John Hartford came out and played some shows with us. Mm-hmm. And Richard Green from the C Train and the Bluegrass Boys came out and played fiddle with us. We were getting on a flight to Boston, and we didn't have a fiddle player. And we had about a week away from that flight, and I called. I had Vasser Clements' number in my wallet still from a night that we had had breakfast with a man named Rule Yarborough down in Alabama. Yeah. And he had played me tapes of Vasser playing at a New Year's party, and I was just blown away. And I don't know if Vasser had done Hillbilly Jazz yet when David Bromberg produced him on that. And but I called Vasser up, and he said, "When do you want me to fly?" It was like, it wasn't even, I didn't even ask him to join the band. I just said, "We've got some gigs." And he said, "When do you want me to be there?" You know, that was Vasser all the way, you know. And so he met us in Boston, and that was the beginning of the band with Vasser. And then he came out to the West Coast all the time. And of course, with Jerry Garcia, everything was on a higher level of, you know, moving people around. And, you know, but the Grateful Dead was, you know, they had taken a slight break, and they were starting to come back together, and they were starting to take up Jerry's time. But he would call us from, you know, backstage at some show in Boston. He'd call me in Grisman, and we'd go to his house, and his wife, Mountain Girl, would answer the phone, and it'd be Jerry, and we'd both talk to him and say, "Yeah, I'm coming home. We're going to play. Yeah, you know." and once Vasser was in the band, it was just sublime, you know. He was the man.
I've heard this record played so much all over the radio throughout the years, and I've had people, not a handful, but many, many people tell me that this is the ultimate bluegrass album, and I think it's just one of the great highlights of your career, and I appreciate you talking about it. But
we believed in live music as you know, the raw material.
Yes, sir, and it was electrifying. Even to listen to it is electrifying. It never gets old. So
thank you.
We're with Grammy award-winning singer-songwriter, entertainer Peter Rowan. And we're talking about 1973 right now. There's one more song that you mentioned in that conversation, Peter, and that was Land of the Navajo. I think the Indian call at the end just completed the whole song. How in the world did you come up with Land of the Navajo?
Well, you know, Bill Monroe had a song called Cheyenne. It's an instrumental, and Vasser played on it. And the song begins with a little bit of a nod to Hank Williams, that Indian, you know, that sort of cliched Indian tom-tom beat. Mm-hmm. Chung, 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 chung. You know, and Hank Williams had done Kalijah. Yeah. You know, Kalijah, that poor old wooden head, you know, about a cigar store Indian. But Bill Monroe's thing was, it's in the key of B, so he's playing a G minor, and he goes, hey, 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 hey. And then the fiddles kick in, and it's called Cheyenne. You know, it was one of his best instrumentals. Yeah. And we still play it today. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was cool, you know. And so in my song, In Land of the Navajo, which I wrote out there in northern New Mexico, southern Utah, out on a vast mesa overlooking the San Juan River and overlooking Monument Valley, camped out up there, and just magic, you know. And so I put my version of that chant at the end of the song. And then, of course, being who we were in our time frame, you know, it sort of grew. Instead of it being just a little short chant like Bill Monroe had done, it started to develop into a jam, you know, a kind of a jam thing. And I had been listening to a lot of jazz, and there was a saxophone player named Pharaoh Sanders, who had a fabulous vocalist who had done some of that yodeling type of singing on a tune called "The Creator Has a Master Plan," and so, you know, we just were feeling expansive, and I brought all those elements in, you know, to make it a kind of a musical piece. It's become quite a meditation, and it does. It seems to move beyond conceptual thought and just sort of go out into this vast thing. People tell me all kinds of things that happen to them during that singing.
Nowhere out on the desert sand, Night Jack the trader held some turquoise in his hand. By his side sat running elk, his longtime Indian friend. He vowed that he would stay by Jack until the bitter end. Jack had gambled everything he owned to lead this wandering life. He might have had a happy home and a tender loving wife. His hunger was for trading trappers' furs for turquoise stone. Anything that the Indians had, Jack wanted for his own. Oh, the wind blows cold on the trail of the buffalo. Oh, the wind blows cold in the land of the Navajo. Filled with dark regret, my spirit longs to journey as the sun begins to set. We raped and killed, we stole your land, we ruled with guns and knives, fed whiskey to your warriors while we stole away your wife. Said running elk, what's done is done, you white men rule this land. So lay the cards face up and play your last broken-hearted hand. Cold on the trail of the buffalo. Oh, the wind blows cold in the land of the Navajo. In the land of the Navajo. Wild ace high, Jack bit the Mississippi River, running elk raised in the sky. Jack saw him with the sun and moon and upped him with the stars. A running elk bit the Rocky Mountains, Jupiter and Mars. The sun was sinking in the west when Jack drew the ace of spades. The running elk just rolled his eyes, he smiled and passed away. Jack picked up his turquoise stones and cast them to the sky. He stared into the setting sun and it made a mournful cry. Oh, the wind blows cold on the trail of the buffalo. Oh, the wind blows cold in the land of the Navajo.
We have Grammy Award-winning Peter Rowan, singer-songwriter, entertainer, with us. This is a two-part question.
Yeah.
Would you give us a little bit of insight on how you got acquainted and worked with Bill Monroe? And then I guess the next question is, you wrote the song, The Light in Carter Stanley's Eyes. Is that true? Is how you brought that song out? So there you go. You can just tell both stories.
Yeah. I was working with the great banjo player Bill Keith and Jim Rooney as their mandolin player. And Bill Monroe came up to New England to do some solo dates. Now, I didn't know this, but I just read in Tom Ewing's book, Mike Seeger and Ralph Ringer had a plan to get 4 skinny young guys in the band and hope that the college kids would see the Beatles next to Bill Monroe. And it was a plan. I didn't know this, but it was also a work in progress. It was, who are these people going to be? And so Bill Keith put the band together with me, Gene Lowinger, Tex Logan, Everett Allen Lilly, Everett Lilly of the Lilly Brothers' young son. And we did 3 or 4 dates up in the New England area, up in Vermont and down. Then we did a concert that was Doc Watson's birthday. It's, I think, Symphony Hall. It could have, I think it was Symphony Hall, or either that or the big hall over at Harvard. But we had a great crowd, and Doc and Bill, did the Monroe Brothers set that they do. And then we came out, and it was like, jumping off a cliff without a parachute. You just didn't know. Yeah. There was no measure to the whole thing, except that Bill would just drive that music, with his sense of rhythm on the mandolin, and his singing was great. He was at the peak of his powers. He was about 52 or 3 years old. I know I was 21 when I first did that with him, and after one of the shows, he said, "Hey, Pete, you ought to come to Nashville. I can help you." And I'm still not sure what he actually meant by that, but I went to Nashville and joined up. Me and Bill Keith used to drive down for the DJ convention, and it was the DJ convention what became fanfare. But back in those days, there were no fans. It was just musicians. And I remember going up to the Fender guitar amplifier room and hearing, Buddy Charlton and Buddy Emmons playing pedal steel, playing Duke Ellington tunes. I mean, the amount of music that was behind the scenes at that time in Nashville was quite extraordinary.
The song, "The Light in Carter Stanley's Eyes," you wrote that.
Okay.
Tell us about the song.
Okay. Well, first of all, it was in a page of my diary from those days. Ralph Ringer, who managed Doc Watson, and Bill Monroe urged me to keep a diary, and I had kept notes and things like that. But then I started keeping an actual diary in my pocket. I carried it for about a year when I joined Bill Monroe. And one day we were over in the Knoxville area, and Knoxville, Tennessee, and he told me, he said, "Carter Stanley needs to see me. Would you drive me up there?" Of course, I drove him in some car, he probably borrowed a car from a friend, as he did that a lot. And I drove him up there to the mountain, and I remember meeting Carter in this field, and I think that's maybe where the Stanley Brothers did their festival after a while, because we had already done Fincastle, Carlton Haney's first Bluegrass Festival in 1965. We'd been to England, and so I was in my second year as a bluegrass boy, and Bill, as I told you, he said, "You've got to be a man has got to be a driver." So I was his driver, and we drove up, and there was Carter, and he was dressed. When you meet the man, you dress. He was dressed. He wasn't in overalls or anything like that. He was in a suit, but he was. I looked at him, and I was introduced in as the song describes, like, "Well, are you serious?" He gave me that look, like, "Are you going to be the man? Carry it on." And and all these were implied of these things. If there were no words, it was implied, because it was important to carry on the bluegrass tradition. And Carter had been a great bluegrass boy. He had been one of Bill's great singers. But I think he had to go in the Army, and that cut that short. However, on that meeting on the side of the mountain, I looked at Carter's eyes, and that's where I got the actual diary entry goes, and I have seen the sunset in Carter Stanley's tombstone eyes. Now, I never wanted to sing that because I just felt that was too kind of harsh in a way, you know, because, but what I didn't understand, and his daughter Jeanette told me when I was working on the song and I sent it to her, I said, what do you think of this? And he said, oh, the daddy would love that. She said, you know, Pete, Carter called Bill Monroe up because he had been to the doctors, and the doctor said he had jaundice. That explains why his eyes were sort of reddish, the sunset in Carter Stanley's eyes.
Wow.
And Carter knew he had about a year to live. And so that phone call to Bill Monroe, and why I even drove them up there, was for Carter to say to Bill, you know, I may not see you again, but would you sing at my funeral? So it's way more involved than just a, you know, right. And I worked with it, and, you know, I changed it to the light in Carter Stanley's eyes, because really the man was a vibrant and living being. But my diary entry was a foreshadowing of the real truth is what I wrote in the diary is he only had about a year to live, and the doctor had told him. And so he had called Bill and he said, would you come? And that trip we drove up there, that's when he asked Bill if he would sing at his funeral. But I stood off to the side. I didn't hear that. You know, I never knew that.
Wow.
And that's how that song happened.
That shines in Carter Stanley's eyes. Bill Monroe had me drive him from Tennessee up to the Clinch Mountains to meet with Carter Stanley at the Stanley Brothers' old home place. And we got up on that mountain to a cleared field, and there was Carter sitting there. I think he wanted to see Bill because he had a feeling of mortality at that time. And Bill Monroe introduced me to Carter Stanley and said, Carter, this here's Pete Rowan. He thinks he's a bluegrass boy. We climbed up on a mountain, Bill Monroe and I, so I could see the light that shone in Carter Stanley's eyes. And Carter looked at me and said, are you going to stick with it, son? I said, yes, sir. And Carter looked at Bill Monroe and said, well, all right. And Bill looked at Carter and said, you were one of the best of the bluegrass boys, Carter, and my favorite lead singer. And we shared something in that moment, kind of a portal might have opened up about the music. And I could see the light that shines in Carter Stanley's eyes. Oh, we climbed up on the mountain, Bill Monroe and I, so I could see the light that shines in Carter Stanley's eyes.
Yeah, and Dave Freeman over at Rebel Records, through the years, had always said, you know, every time I drift out there and do a reggae album or, you know, Hawaiian album, you know, Dave would say, you know, you've gotten so close. Would you do something with Rebel that was really in the tradition, you know? So Ralph Stanley had recorded a couple of songs of mine that I don't think they've been released, but they one called "I Will Work for Food," and the other one that Ralph called "Drum Beats on the Watchtower," which I recorded as "Wild Geese Fly Again," based on a Chinese poem. So, but I would see Ralph at festivals, and we always hit it off really well. And he saw that what I was doing over the years was I was just exploring. And another man in the band who was a longtime friend was Jack Cook. I first met Jack Cook when I hitchhiked from college, where I was up in upstate New York. I hitchhiked to D.C. and he had just left. Jack Cook had just left the Bill Monroe band when I met him, and he was a guitar player. Mm-hmm. He was a singer. He was like a front man, and he was playing down in Baltimore at this bar, and I was just, man, it was great to meet these people. Don Stover was up in Boston with the Lilly Brothers, and he had been in the band with Jack Cook as a bluegrass boy. So, you know what I mean? It's the interconnectingness of all these great musicians. And and I always felt a great affinity to the Stanley Brothers sound, especially the gospel music. But I knew Carter, it was sort of well known that Carter had troubles, of substances. And so that's how that happened. Yeah.
Such a fantastic story. God, I just love these. Yeah. Love the people I just love talking with you, listening to you. I don't want to take up all of your time. I'm so sorry, but I just felt that.
It's all right. It's all right. I'm in a funny place in my life. I'm about to turn 80 on July 4th.
Wow.
And it's been a wild ride. We had to outlive the shame of success to really understand what's going on.
Well, I certainly hope that you've enjoyed this great conversation with this legend, the great Peter Rowan. I cannot thank him enough for telling us about some of the great history of bluegrass music. As a reminder, don't forget to check out his brand new album, and that album is called Calling You From My Mountain, released on Rebel Records. The great Peter Rowan here on the Big Al and Sandy Radio Show.